Have you ever really stopped to think about why a perfectly manicured lawn feels so different from, say, a wild, rambling meadow? The way we shape our gardens, our parks, our city squares, well, it's not just about making things look pretty. It's actually a window into how we think about the world, about power, about paradise, and our whole relationship with nature itself. So that brings us to the big question that's really at the heart of all this. What's the deal with nature? Is it just a blank canvas for us to paint our own vision of perfection on? Something to be controlled and perfected? Or is it a muse, something we should listen to and follow its lead, embracing all its wild, unpredictable beauty? All right, here's how we're going to tackle that. First, we'll dive into those two big ideas, taming nature versus embracing it. We'll look at gardens built to show off power and create a perfect paradise. Then we'll flip to the other side, gardens that are all about nature and Zen. After that, we'll see how this whole debate plays out in our own cities, and we'll wrap up by looking at the tricky business of how we even begin to preserve these amazing living histories. Okay, let's kick things off with the idea of total, absolute control. We're talking about gardens that weren't just designed to be beautiful. They were designed to be these huge, in-your-face statements about human power and our idealized visions of what perfection should look like. And you just can't find a better example of this than in 17th century France. The French Baroque garden, it wasn't a quiet little escape. Oh no. It was a massive, sprawling declaration of power. It basically screamed that mankind, and let's be real, specifically the king, could take the chaos of the natural world and bend it to his will, imposing perfect, rational order on everything. And if you look at Versailles, you can see exactly how they pulled it off. The guy behind it, a master designer named André Lenotre, used this incredible feature called the infinite axis, this huge central path that just seems to stretch on forever, right to the horizon. It was a symbol of the king's endless power. And then you have these elaborate hedge patterns, the parterres that look like intricate carpets from the palace windows. Even the trees were tortured into perfect geometric shapes. Every single detail had one job, to reinforce the message of absolute control. Now, let's jump over to a totally different vision of a perfect landscape, the Mughal Gardens of India. The philosophy here, it wasn't about flexing your earthly power in the same way. It was about creating a little slice of heaven right here on earth. A real, physical version of paradise, or Jannat as it's described in the Quran. So the real key to getting these gardens is something called the Charbagh layout. It's a 4-part garden, a perfect square, divided by water channels. And those channels represent the 4 rivers of paradise: water, milk, wine, and honey. It was all enclosed by high walls, creating this private, perfect little world, with pavilions for shade and even these textured ramps for the water that made this beautiful, soothing sound. It was a complete sensory experience of perfection. Okay, so let's flip the coin and look at the other side of this. What happens when the goal isn't to control nature, but to celebrate it? This is all about the art of looking natural, which, ironically, can be just as carefully planned and designed. It's about creating an idealized version of nature, one that looks totally effortless. So, over in 18th century England, a full-blown rebellion was brewing against that super rigid geometric French style. They basically looked at Versailles and said, "No thank you." And out of that came the English landscape garden. The whole point was to create a picturesque scene, to make the landscape look like a beautiful, romantic painting. They loved rolling hills, winding lakes, and the beauty of things not being perfectly symmetrical. And a lot of this was made possible by this really ingenious invention called the ha-ha wall. I love this. So, the problem was simple, right? You're a rich landowner, you want this gorgeous, unbroken view of your estate, but you've got sheep and cattle and you need to keep them off your perfect lawn. What do? The solution was brilliant. You dig a sunken ditch with a wall on one side. From the house, you can't see it at all. It's completely invisible, giving you this perfect illusion of a single seamless landscape stretching out before you. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, in Japan, a completely different idea of a natural garden was being perfected. See, Japanese gardens aren't just trying to look natural. They are these incredibly deep symbolic spaces that come right out of Zen philosophy. Every single rock, every plant, every patch of raked gravel, it's all a miniature version of the entire universe, and it's all designed to help you meditate and reflect. And one of my favorite ideas from this tradition is shake, which means borrowed scenery. It's just a masterful concept. The garden is designed specifically to frame a distant view, like a mountain or a forest, and in doing so, it borrows that view, making it feel like it's actually part of the garden's design.
So it's not about controlling nature. It's about collaborating with it. It's a partnership.
So this exact same push and pull between order and nature, well, it doesn't just happen in private gardens. It plays out on a much bigger scale in our cities. Public squares, they aren't just empty spaces between buildings. They are the stages where a society's values, whether it's messy democracy or rigid imperial order, get literally built into the ground we walk on.
You can actually trace this story right through history. You start with the Greek agora, this kind of chaotic, irregular hub of democracy and commerce. Then the Romans come along and create the Forum, which is way more rigid and formal. After that, you get the cozy, organic medieval piazza, which then gives way to the grand, symmetrical, and perfectly geometric plazas of the Renaissance. Each one tells you something about the people who built it.
And putting the first two side by side makes the difference totally clear. The Greek agora was regular, it was open, it was defined by this vibrant, chaotic, democratic energy. But the Roman Forum, that was a powerful symbol of imperial might. It had a rigid, axial layout designed to awe you, to project power. One space celebrated a kind of messy freedom, the other demanded absolute order.
And you know, sometimes the designers just tell you exactly what they were thinking. When the great artist Bernini designed those massive, curving colonnades for St. Peter's Square, he literally said they were meant to be the motherly arms of the church, reaching out to embrace the crowds of the faithful. The symbolism is built right into the architecture.
Okay, so this all brings us to a really interesting modern problem. These historic landscapes, they aren't like paintings in a museum. They're living, breathing systems. They change. So how in the world do we preserve them when the very things they're made of, plants, trees, even the way we use the space, are constantly evolving?
So, what's the game plan today? Well, one modern approach is called the Historic Urban Landscape, or HUL. The main idea here is that you can't just stick a pin in one building or one park and say, protect this. You have to look at the whole picture, the entire city, its buildings, its open spaces, its culture, and treat it all as one single interconnected piece of heritage.
But this way of thinking leads to some really tough questions. Let me give you a scenario. Imagine a historic tree, one that was part of the original design hundreds of years ago. It finally dies of old age. So, what do you do now?
Well, you're basically at a crossroads between two competing ideas. Do you try to preserve the historical integrity? That means you care most about the designer's original plan, so you'd plant a new little sapling of the same species to keep the vision alive. Or do you go for historical authenticity? That means the original stuff is what matters most, so you'd leave the dead trunk right where it is as a genuine artifact from that time. And honestly, there's no easy answer.
All right, we have covered a ton of ground, from the palaces of France all the way to the Zen temples of Japan. So let's do a quick little check-in, see what you remember. First question, that garden layout with the four-part square and the water channels, the one that represents an earthly paradise, what's that called? Is it A, parterre, B, haha, or C, Charbagh? If you said C, Charbagh, you got it. Okay, one more. What about that brilliant Japanese idea of borrowed scenery, where you pull a distant mountain right into your garden's design? What do we call that? Yep, that's A, shake.
So here's my final thought for you. The next time you're walking through a city park or sitting in a public square, I want you to look around and ask yourself, is this space about control or is it about feeling natural? Is it all straight lines and symmetry or is it flowing and organic? What does the design of the world around you really say about what we value today?